well over a year ago, a friend of mine who works at the Middletown Library approached me about doing a talk for them. And since it was Women's History Month, I decided, well, let's do the history of women crime writers.
Right.
Wonderfully received, blah, 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 except that, like, Lynn, 2 weeks before we were supposed to do some of this stuff,
Yeah.
everything shut down. So I, put everything on hold. And then when I volunteered to be program chair, one of the things I thought was, well, hey, I'll just slip into one of these slots because that's one less person I have to look for. So I decided to take March and do the history of crime writers. And at this point, you're all thinking, well, then shut up and talk about it because we don't need to know anymore. But, so I will start on this. Now, the first thing you probably know, and if you don't, just cut out right now because you don't belong here. Edgar Allan Poe is the one who initiated the detective story with the murders in the Rue Morgue, not the detective novel. The first detective novel was written by an English woman, Mary Elizabeth Braden. It was published in serial form because that's what everybody did in those days, to keep everybody coming back. The first book was The Trail of the Serpent, and it appeared in 1861. Her detective was a deaf mute, and the book consists of a series of letters written by him to his home office, which was an insurance company. She went on to write Lady Audrey's Secret in 1862 and Aurora Flood in 1863. Those two books, I believe, can be searched out and found because I believe I read Lady Audrey's Secret. I will let you know, I have been working around this just over the years, 49 years of book selling, and a lot of it really concentrating on the mysteries. I bought a bunch of reference books, I did this and that. So over the years, I have read a lot of stuff that nobody else wants to read. But if you have a chance, read some of these ones. They were very, very prolific. Mrs. Braden wrote 90 novels and 150 short stories, as well as plays. She was known as the Queen of Sensation, because that's what they called these. They were sort of more of a Gothic. How many remember Gothics?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The light in the window, the woman fleeing in the middle of the night. That's kind of some of the elements that these early, novels took place, were concerned with. She had a largely working class readership. And she found serialization format very problematic since she was working on several novels at one time.
Yeah.
She called this process hand-to-mouth composition. So if you think, well, I guess it would be like if we had 14 critique groups and we had to write something for every critique group. Mm-hmm. I have more bourbon before I start talking. Okay, I can't be serious. It's not a bone in me that is serious. Maida Fuller Victor. She is credited with publishing the first American detective story. It was entitled The Dead Letter, and it was published in 1866. She also was prolific, writing over 100 dime novels, little bitty things, while editing her husband's magazine, the Cosmopolitan Art Journal. Many of these dime novels were written under several pseudonyms, including Seeley Register, which I believe you can find some of her books. Now, I will say that the e-book revolution, a lot of these old things are appearing as e-books. So if you want to find them, you might be able to. Even though she was the most successful writer of popular fiction around the time of the Civil War, very little is actually known of her personal life. Now we come to a biggie. In 1878, Anna Catherine Green published The Leavenworth Case. This book went on to become a great bestseller. She wrote in secrecy because her father thought women at that time should only write poetry. She took 2.5 years to write. And she introduced a detective, Ebenezer Grice, and an amateur detective, Amelia Butterworth. Most of her stories, as you might imagine, because you write what you know, revolved around the domestic situation. She had a lot of concerns for women, either as servants or those who served the women in that status, more like hers. Some of her female characters were uppity, my word, not hers, and wanting things they shouldn't. In the Leavenworth case, the two detectives are solving a crime that was associated with greed. Now, here we come. First, show and tell. That Affair Next Door, featuring both of those detectives, amateur and was recently reissued as part of the Library of Congress Crime Classic series. This is very, very exciting for those of us who want to read some of these old books.
Can you hold that up one more time and a little slower?
Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. The Affair Next Door.
Okay, good.
Okay. Available at your bookstores, or at least ours. And the reason it's available is because of moi. I've decided that we need to have a better mystery selection, so I went back and ordered a bunch of stuff that may or may not sell. If they put me out on the floor, it would sell. But behind the register, I can only compliment people that buy it as they walk by. At the turn of the 20th century, the sensation novel with its Gothic overtones hit its stride. Mary Roberts Reinhardt. How many people remember Mary Roberts? She created the "had I but known" formula for novels. I think I'm talking too loud, but anyway.
No, you're not.
No.
Okay. Circular Staircase has one of the best opening lines. I'm going to read it to you. This is the story of how a middle-aged spinster lost her mind, deserted her domestic gods in the city, took a furnished house for the summer out of town, and found herself involved in one of those mysterious crimes that keeps our newspapers and detective agencies happy and prosperous. She wrote a ton of books between 1909 and 1936. Now, Otto Penzler, if you don't know his name, you should. He runs the Mysterious Bookshop in New York City. He also is head of Mysterious Press, and they got together, and now he's publishing American Mystery Classics. And he's done several women, but also several men. And again, where can you find it? On an end cap at Barnes & Noble. So pick it up, read it. Get your, and then you will know what happened to Had I But Known, which I'm going to use as an opening in one of the many books I'm going to try and write. I'll never get to 90, but okay. Now I'm going to tell you, this is an aside. Many years ago, when I was doing this, let's read all these, old authors and forgotten authors. Somehow I stumbled across a team of writers, Constance and Gwyneth Little. They wrote what we would call standalone mysteries, and they weren't very thick, but they wrote over 35 of them. And a small press called Rue Morgue reprinted many of these. And they were quick, enjoyable, and I was able to find them, source them through the public library. They were not on any of the bookstore shelves because at that time, which again is 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, Rue Morgue was almost what you would call a print-on-demand press. And most of your bookstores wouldn't carry it then and struggle to carry it now. But if you can find them, I remember laughing. They were very, very good. And again, you're not going to have any series detective, and but it was a lot of fun.
And who are they again?
Constance and Gwyneth Little.
Were they sisters?
Yes, ma'am. So I imagine they got along, or they just wrote books about how they'd like to kill each other. I say. In the 1920s, Black Mask magazine, does that ring a bell? Appeared in the US. It featured an ever-growing list of mystery suspense authors, but most of them were men. One exception was Catherine Brocklebank, who created the first female series character, Tex of the Border Patrol. Images all over the place, right? You can see Tex right there at the border. She was born in Pennsylvania in 1877 and died in 1962. She published 7 stories in Black Mask, which really was amazing for a female writer. There is a book called Hard Boiled Dames by Bernard Drew, one of many books by Reference Wise, and she gets a mention. That's how I found her, in that book, you know, in the 20s and 30s. Okay, now, in the 20s and 30s, what was happening over in Britain? Anybody want to guess? The golden age of mysteries.
Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie's. Is that Dorothy Sayers period? And
well, let's call it the Agatha Christie series. That, yeah. And again, on my little end cap, I call Agatha the GOAT, the greatest of all times, because of all these authors I'm talking about now, from the past and going forward, she is the one woman whose books do not leave that shelf. Everybody else, you know, you might be able to find one. She's got the whole shelf, and she has got some of the best books ever written. Now, Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Okay. This book introduces the unreliable narrator. You know, she's got Miss Marple over there, and she's got Poirot over there, and tons of books on both of those. But this book is considered by many her best. And one critic even said that if she hadn't written all those thousands of other books and plays and short stories, if she had only written this book, she would still be the greatest mystery writer.
Mm.
So if you haven't read it, where can we find it?
At Barnes and Noble?
Yes.
What was the name of the book again?
Pardon?
What was the name of the book again?
The Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Pull it back a little bit because because the light was shining on it. Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
I did not make a reading list. I did not make a, you know, something that I can pass along. I can easily put something together and email it to everybody, so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to.
That would be wonderful.
Because
That would be.
you all know that my talk is very scintillating, and you won't want to miss a word. Okay, anyway, now, last year was the 100th anniversary of the publication in Britain, not in the United States, of the first Poirot novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. She wrote, Aunt Agatha, wrote 74 novels and 16 plays. And I know you've all heard of The Mousetrap.
Yeah.
Most famous of her plays. It opened in 1952 and ran continuously until March 16th, 2020, when the pandemic closed all the theaters. Wouldn't you like to be her nephew who got the royalties from that?
Oh yeah.
Just a little thought there, put it out there. How much money does he have? Okay, a contemporary of Christie's, to Lorena's point, Dorothy L. Sayers. And she had a great impact on the genre because she created Lord Peter Wimsey. He was a member of the aristocracy, and at that time he was one of the ones that had time to solve these mysteries. His first case involved Harriet Vane, who was found innocent of murder because of Lord Peter. This led to a romance, and Harriet ended up, you know, marrying him, and they all, you know, went off to solve crimes together. Sayers was born in 1993. Excuse me one second. Thank you, Daisy. Go down. I think she's a Sayers fan. She was educated at Oxford, which was unusual for a woman at that time. She got her first class degree in medieval French poetry. And she also translated Dante's Divine Comedy, which she felt to be her best work overall. Her first book was Whose Body, and that was published in 1923. But she stopped writing. She only wrote for a little over a decade or so, and she died in 1957. But she made her impact on the field of crime fiction. Two women who were influenced by Sayers' creation of Lord Peter were Nao Marsh and Marjorie Allingham. Now, Marsh, again, you're going to see something. I came across this little pamphlet, and I don't know where I found it or what it, a little pamphlet called Give Me That Old Time Detection from the summer of 2005. And there's a picture of Miss Marsh, and there's a little essay, and I don't know if you can see the typing, but it really is just the old typing pages, nothing formatted in many ways. And I stumbled upon this in the world famous basement of mine that has 1,000 books laying around. Her books, unfortunately, are not available, not many in book form. I did order the collected short stories. She introduced Roderick Allen, Inspector Roderick Allen. He again was a, let's see, he was a member of an old aristocratic family, and he had an assistant, an Inspector Fox, who helped solve the crimes. He also fell in love with a suspect and married her. She had a theatrical background, and a lot of her books are set around the theater and different productions that came out at that time, or around it. Marjorie Allingham also created a gentleman sleuth, Albert Campion. Now, this is her first book, The Crime at Black Dudley, and he had a minor role in this, but her American publisher really, really liked him. So she moved him from the background to center stage. She wrote over 18 books and numerous short stories. And a lot of these gentlemen sleuths, I know Campion for sure, was made into a variety of movies and TV shows from ITV and BBC. So if you are interested in that, that's a whole other group of things you can get involved with. Now, the Golden Age stories generally centered around the country, home, or small village, and contained a cast of characters drawn from the upper crust and had a company of servants to add to the list of suspects. The murders were always interesting in both manner and means, and they took place off stage. So the characters and readers remained free of blood spatter. Very formulaic, clues were needed to be inserted throughout the book so the reader could solve the puzzle along with the detective. These books are the precursors to today's cozies. Know anything about the book selling at this point? Cozies they just fly off the shelf.
Yeah.
So if you want to write something and sell it, write a cozy. But remember, you can't kill the dog, can't kill the cat. The blood has to be off the page. In 1940s, if any, and I remember those years well, a seismic shift in mystery and detective fiction took place. The hard-boiled detective was born, birthed by Hammett and Chandler. Gritty, solitary characters and stories. As is said, crime came out of the drawing room and into the mean streets where it belonged. Most of these authors were male, former law enforcement personnel. The language was coarser, the blood was on the page. One would think that didn't afford much space for women writers to join in the fray, but not so. The 40s and 50s also brought a new vista for writers, both men and women, to explore. World War II. Many of the men left to go off to fight. Women were at home on the home front, stepping away from the stove and into jobs once held by men who were now off soldiering. The end of the war meant thousands of these men came home and they had to get reacquainted with both their wives and the family. They stepped into a whole new world, many of them bringing psychological problems which only muddied these relationships even more. Some of the successful women writers studied this and used these problems as a basis for their novels. In 2015, the Library of America published 2 volumes to celebrate these women writers of the 40s and 50s. Each volume contained 4 novels published in those decades. Some of these names will sound familiar to you, and some were a surprise to me. In 1940s, Vera Caspary, her book Laura, published in 1943, and that's the one that made that very, very famous movie. Okay, that was included in this volume. Helen Eustace, The Horizontal Man, is a college mystery about a womanizing professor. Go figure. Dorothy B. Hughes, In a Lonely Place, is accorded the twin honor of being a great serial killer novel, as well as a great Los Angeles novel. In this one, I would love to find and read Elizabeth Holding's The Blank Wall, published in 1947, studies World War II home front and a different type of family life. Lucia Holly, wife and mother, faces a crisis with her teenage daughter and an unsavory boyfriend. But her greatest challenge is what to do with the corpse. She's a woman in charge of protecting her family while her husband is off fighting the war. She just tells herself, I can do this. 1950s volume contains Mischief by Charlotte Armstrong. And I remember her as the author of so many wonderful Gothic paperbacks. When I started in this business in 1972, I bet the shelf had, like 47 of her books on there. And now you can find one. Where? On the end cap at Barnes & Noble. Otto Penzler, American Mystery Classics, The Chocolate Cobweb. So that's what I bought that because I'm going to go back and read that just because. Now, I'm hoping I don't have my books out of order here, but I might. I tore my basement apart trying to find books, and then I ended up buying books, and is what happens in my life. Patricia Highsmith. Anybody remember what her most famous book is?
Ripley.
The Talented Mr. Ripley, which Barnes & Noble had the foresight of saying, of setting up a whole table saying, this is our newly rediscovered classic. So if you walk in the door, there it is. But in the Library of America shows her novel, The Blunderer, rather than The Talented Mr. Ripley. And this is her tale of 2 husbands accused of killing their wives and the policeman who is pursuing them. Now, Patricia Highsmith is known for her psychological novels and definitely noir. She got out of that cozy, right out there. Now, Margaret Millar, Beast in View, won an Edgar for this best novel, and that's also included in the 50s volume. She wrote 3 different series, but only had 3 books in each of the series. So she was very prolific in her standalones, and she published from 1944 until 1986. She was the wife of Ross MacDonald, who created the Lou Archer series. And all I can think about is what their dinner conversations were like. How and why would you kill someone and get away with it? Fool's Gold by Dorothy Hitchens, Hitchens, rounds out the 1950s volume. She was the author of a lot of police procedurals, private eye novels, and suspense novels. And this is a curious honor, as D.B. Olson, she created the cat cozy. Now, I don't know if that's, I don't know if she's probably dead, but I don't know that they put that on the tombstone, you know. So when you look at all those cozy books with the cat and the dog or other critters on there, remember D.B. Olson. Now, going in another direction at the same time in this 40s period was a woman, Georgiana Ann Randolph. But she took up the pen name and published under Craig Rice. Her books are noted for their humor and their wackiness. She was called the Dorothy Parker of detective fiction. Her protagonist, one John J. Malone, a most disreputable lawyer, is hysterical. And here's another little aside. There is an old black and white movie called Mrs. O'Malley and Mr. Malone, starring James Whitmore and Marjorie Main. And every time I want to laugh, I stick it into the, you know, my brother recorded it off of something, and I stick it in and I watch it because it amuses me every time. Now, Rice was the first mystery writer and the first woman mystery writer to appear on the cover of Time magazine, January 28th, 1946. Okay. A lot of those women we just talked about within the specific dates continued to write well into the next decade or two. It is, you know, like as I've said about 87 times, it's a shame that so many of their books are no longer in print. And I think really if you, even I went down to Half Price Books and looked through their selection, they have all the current books. I don't know where, other than a good solid mystery, used mystery bookstore, would you find some of these works. And again, if you've got a Kindle or a Nook, I think they're available on ebook, a lot of this. Now, we're going to tiptoe into the 1960s. I don't really have too many of these books here. Emma Lathan is the pen name of two very well-educated women, Mary Jane Lattis and Martha Hennesart. Under the pen name of Emma Lathan, they created John Putnam Thatcher and wrote 25 books featuring this detective. He was a detective and a banker. Under the pseudonym of R.B. Dominic, they penned stories about a congressman, Benton Safford, who was also a sleuth. Now, Ruth Rendell introduced us to Inspector Wexford, and as Barbara Vine, a slew of standalone books. Wexford's novels were police procedurals, but she's also known for her psychological themes. Let's see, I thought I had, but I don't. She really delved into the human mind and the misunderstandings that, you know, rattle around inside one's brain. Del Shannon, and not the one who sang Run, Run, Run Away, is the pen name. That discussion came up at the store.
That was my first thought.
This is the pen name for Elizabeth Lennington, and she introduced us to a Mexican-American homicide detective, Luis Mendoza. 30 years later, or 30 books later, she was crowned the Queen of Police Procedurals. Published in 1960, a year we all remember well, Case Pending takes the reader inside the precinct. Shannon knew these readers expected a high standard of correctness, and she got it right. Okay, and now we're going to shift a little bit. We're still in the 1960s, and we're going to come to a woman who, again, like Agatha Christie, changed a lot of things. Phyllis Dorothy James, otherwise known as P.D. James. She wrote her first book, Cover Her Face. And in my estimation, she elevated the writing of the book to a higher standard. Her use of language is as only a Brit can do. Oh, you know, a little better than all of us Americans, right? She got up before dawn and started writing to help support her family. She introduced Inspector Adam Dalgleish, her most famous creation, and he preferred poetry to murder, but he never hesitated to get the job done. So this is one of her later books, which I guess A Certain Justice. That's a Dalgleish. And again, I don't know how many times that has been put on by the BBC. But in 1972, she published An Unsuitable Job for a Woman. And that title says it all, because that's the way the public felt about women in law enforcement, either as a private detective or a police officer. Cordelia Gray was the woman who had the unsuitable job. She inherited a private inquiry firm from her partner. She only wrote 2 books with Gray as the central character, but they made a big impact in the field. In 2009, Dame James published Talking About Detective Fiction, and it is well worth reading whether you're a writer or a reader. Her insights into the process and into her fellow writers. Okay. Cordelia Gray may not fit the strict definition of a hard-boiled detective, but she definitely wasn't Miss Marple. Now, on this side of the pond, as we say, a lady named Marcia Muller published Edwin of the Iron Shoes, the first in the Sharon McComb series in 1977. Muller, who is about 2'3" tall, I met her. It was a grand privilege to meet her at a BoucherCon or one of those things I attended. She is considered the mother, or at this point, grandmother of women mystery writers, those who feature tough, independent-minded women as the detective. These women are professionals through and through, real women doing real jobs, taking and giving a punch with the best of them. And this was the one I've got down in the basement. She's got some, she's still being published, but it's, again, her shelf is down to 1 or 2 books, you know, the new one and maybe one of the older ones. And it's a shame. She, obviously they are dated because she started writing in 1977. You know, but they're good. And if you want to know our roots as women writers, she would be a good one to pick up and read through, you know, bits and pieces. Then we're going to come to our founding mother, Sarah Paretsky. And this is Mystery Scene Magazine, and if you haven't heard me talk about it, you weren't a member of our mystery reading group. Teresa can tell you how every month I would come to the meeting with the Mystery Scene Magazine, the best magazine out there for information about new books, old books, what's happening in the world of the mystery. So if you get a chance, you have to subscribe at this point because, and we won't go into it, why we don't carry it anymore at the store because I don't really know. But anyway, Sarah Paretsky started her V.I. Warshawski mystery series. And she jumped to the bestseller list. And I think, and that was a big step because a lot of women writers really weren't at that point. Even Marcia Muller probably didn't make it with the regularity that Sarah Paretsky did. You know, V.I. Warshawski is set in Chicago. And, you know, people in Chicago, they can knock the teeth out of a villain and not break a sweat. And she's still writing, and V.I. is still solving and fighting for justice. And Paretsky uses her books as a platform for social reform and comment. Domestic violence is a big topic with her. Now, in 1986, what did Sarah do? Anybody?
Formed SIC.
You're right. She and several of the other writers got together and realized that the playing field for female writers was not at all level. So they created Sisters in Crime. The mission is to promote the ongoing advancement, recognition, and professional women crime writers. That's what they want. That's what they started to do. And I do believe they've been somewhat successful in all that. Now, mysteries and crime fiction, which is what they call it in Britain. You don't have mystery conferences, you have crime fiction conferences over there. Branched out in many directions. The country house mysteries of Christie and Sayers led to the explosion of cozies, as I said before. Those books are still very profitable and prolific. I wrote this, and I'm just gonna have to say it because I like the way I wrote it. The sleuth is usually a woman who has a friend with professional policing knowledge and skills, obviously because the amateur sleuth can't do anything other than the arrests are made by this friend, because you don't have Gomer Pyle running down the street yelling, "Citizens arrest! Citizens arrest!" One of my favorite Andy Griffith show, episodes. Okay. Well, I have talked almost. All right. We're going to end with a nod to our own Sue Grafton. S is for Sue is what they have on the cover of this magazine, the Mystery Scene magazine. Born in Louisville in 1940, she published A is for Alibi in 1982. And set herself one heck of a goal of trying to get all the way through the alphabet.
Yeah.
She died in 2017. Her vision of her detective, Kinsey Milhone, never aged. So Kinsey's breasts never sagged, her waistline never grew, and her knees never faltered. Unlike a lot of the other detectives that aged as they went along, and most of them would be our age, and I don't know about you, but I'm not chasing anybody anywhere, That's it. There were so many other books and authors that I wanted to pull in and talk about, but I tried to stick to the ones that actually made an impact and, had little shoots growing off of them. Dorothy L. Sayers, Agatha Christie, Sarah Paretsky, and all those. And like I said, if anyone is interested, I can go ahead and give you a family tree and a reading list. There are a ton of books out there about the mystery field. And there are a lot of books written about female sleuths, whether written by a man or a woman. So you can just do all sorts of research. And a long time ago, before the computer, a lady, and I can't think of her full name, she came up with a book called Detecting Men, and then she wrote one called Detecting Women. And if you've never seen it, they're just amazing because, again, this was done without the computer. But she'll list Sue Grafton and then all of her books in the year they were published. And then there's a section in there where she talks about Kinsey Milhone and where she solved the crimes, whether she was a private eye, ex-cop, or whatever. The cross-referencing is just amazing. Well, thank you, Debbie.
Detecting women. Oh, that looks cool. That looks
Say
cool.
something, Debbie, and then you'll be on the big screen.
Oh, okay. Did that work?
That worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is
I've had this book for a long, long time.
Yeah.
This is the third edition, I believe.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then they came out with a little pocket edition that I carried around where you can check off what you've read and what
Right.
you're looking for. And it was really, now with the internet, it's not published anymore. You go online to look up all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just, in amazement that she, I can see papers all over the place, and the cat would sneeze and there would go the whole organization. But she did a wonderful job with that, a wonderful job. So this is just this, kind of the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. At the beginning, the founding, Anna Catherine Green and Maida Fuller Victor, and those again, hard to find. We can always get more information, and I would imagine, because I've read some of it, they're a little stilted for what we do nowadays, but the basis is there. They were out there solving crimes and that. So, but if you have a chance, pick up some of these older authors and see where our roots are, and see what devices they used and what they. Again, they didn't have DNA and the luminol and all that stuff that you could spray and try and solve crimes that way. They had to use those little gray cells and work from that. So their plots and clues are very interesting. So I hope that has whetted your appetite, and that you will go forth and search out some of these. How these women writers manage to turn women into sleuths. I think that they probably did it just like we would. They're nosy. An amateur, I mean, basically that's what the amateur person is, not the person who's sitting at home and hears a gunshot and says, oh, they're the person that gets out of bed and goes and looks to see, well, what do you think happened? And again, with an amateur sleuth, you have to have someone in law enforcement that's going to actually make the arrest in that. So, you have to have the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, or something like that. But I think with like Amelia Butterworth, she sat at the window and watched her neighbors. And, two people go into the house and one person comes out. And the next morning she finds out that the other person is dead. Well, Amelia probably could, go off to check what the menu is for the day. Or she might want to go across the street and see, well, wonder what I could find, and talk to the staff and stuff like that. So I think it was just a natural progression of people with a keen interest in their fellow human beings and the clay feet many of them have. So anything else that I can pick up an answer for?
Well, another motivation is if someone that I know is being charged with the crime, and so that's a big draw for some of these amateurs to get into the sleuthing, because my husband's going to be hung or whatever, and so and I can't remember any of the stories that I've read that were like that, but they've saved people they know, and by getting into the solution of the crime.
Right, yeah.
Dorothy Sayers is also, what she impressed upon me is she actually did not want to write fiction. She wanted to write nonfiction. But and so she wrote the 5 whimsy novels in order to get enough money to support herself so she could write the nonfiction. But anyway, the thing that really interested me about what she wrote is that those 5 novels, across those 5 novels, the relationship between Whimsy and I forgot her name, but Whimsy, Harriet Vane, the relationship grew. And so you had a relationship that developed over the course of all those books and ended up in their getting married, and then they're working together. It was a sort of an interesting development.
Eileen asked a question about, or a query about what after the 70s, because I chose to stop at the 70s, because I was doing more of the history of, and of course the 70s, that's 50 years ago. I could have gone forward, but I found myself, because I did pull out more books and more names. And I found myself just blossoming into 1,000 names and 1,000 books. And I thought, well, I'm going to stop with Grafton with that. My bookseller interpretation of some of this is that a lot of the new writers coming out, and there are a lot of good ones, but they're leaning more towards thriller than the what we would call the classic mystery, where there's a puzzle to be solved or a crime to be solved. And there's nothing, and you know, as Seinfeld said, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not necessarily what I would choose to read. I want strong characters. I honestly don't care how the mystery is solved. Not for me. I want a strong character, interesting story to go along with it. But if they leave the, you know, at the end it's unsolved, it's fine. That's fine, as long as we had a nice, pleasant visit along the way. Now, there's only one person I know that wrote a book, well, besides myself, where the mystery wasn't solved. And someone asked me, well, how could you do that? And I said, because my maestro, in my case, is Lawrence Block. And he wrote a book and the mystery wasn't solved. And of course, people, oh my God, how could you do that? And he said, because in real life, they're not all solved. And I said, if it's good enough for Larry,
So, Elaine, in terms of what is really trending right now, you mentioned that the cozies are still very popular. What else is in the mystery area are you finding is very popular?
well, in a lot of it, I say is thriller or leaning more towards thriller.
Yeah.
You know, obviously James Patterson, Vince Flynn.
Yeah.
Oh God! Now that you've asked me, I'm trying to think because but they're more what I would consider the thriller area.
Yeah.
Though we do sell a certain, you know, there are enough women writers going through. Anne Cleves is making a wonderful, you know, she's a Brit, and again, one of those people that I flew across the pond to meet because I was so impressed with her books. And she has just blossomed because of the TV series that they've made out of her books. Jacqueline Winspear in the Maisie Dobbs, which is it's kind of a toss between a cozy and a psychological, you know, because Maisie is a forerunner to a psychiatrist after World War II, but it's very atmospheric, you know. And then Charles Todd, which is the mom and son, sell a lot of books. If you really want to make a lot of money, get a book that the school wants to read every year.
Yeah.
And then there were none. Murder on the Orient Express, you know. Those are, you know, and of course she does have the following with, you know, and her books have been picked up and are being, Sophie Hannah, and I can't think of, writes one of them, and somebody else. So I'm thinking once I'm dead and somebody else picks up my books, I'm sure the quality will improve. But cozies, and now let's go back to, you know, we're in a pandemic. We've been in a pandemic for a year now. Prior to the pandemic, cozies sold, but now they really sell. And why? Because people want a nice, safe atmosphere.
So I have a question about, I see an awful lot of paranormal, time travel, witch stories, vampires. Where do you see that in the hierarchy of what's selling from a bookseller's perspective? I see a lot of that advertised, and it's not my bailiwick, but it seems like there are an awful lot of people that are putting them out.
Yes. I was totally bowled over by the Twilight series. Who knew vampires were coming back? And
They always come back because
They never leave.
Munsch, yes.
There isn't as much of a gap between young adult and adult fiction anymore. In fact, I think some of the young adult, and especially when you're in that paranormal, and there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of it, but I can see where people might, want to believe in something that can help you that you can't see or that isn't normal. And Eileen popped up with Charlene Harris, who, she's Elements of Cozy. She wrote that Shakespeare, the series, which can be considered cozy. But she also wrote the Sookie Stackhouse, which apparently,
True Blood. Yep.
yeah, it's very erotic, if not, one lady once told me she thought it was downright porn. But there is a lot of that out there too, that, borderline. I can remember when romance, especially historical romance, they called them the bodice rippers, but that was about as much that got ripped was the bodice. Nowadays, body parts are mentioned, and so young adult. I was amazed at how many people adults were reading young adults, and I was pleased that they were reading, because a lot of times I feel like some people that come into the store, this is the first time they've been in a store, and they pick up things that I probably would say, nah, you don't want to read that, but it's not a good book. And then I stop and think, at least they're reading. It may not be the best thing that they're ever going to read, but if they read that, they may want to move on to something else, which possibly is a little better. But far be it from me to judge, what people read. I'm just happy that they're in the bookstore and their kids are reading. And the supernatural, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, saved generations of readers. Kids were reading it, their parents were reading it. And speaking of J.K., she writes a mean mystery under Robert Galbraith. They're very, very good. Her last book was 900 pages. And Eileen just said it saved Scholastic too. That's true. That is true. But
I think her books can be credited with causing a lot of young people to learn to read and enjoy reading.
Yeah.
And their parents, because a lot of parents read the books with the children.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's a good bond. And then the parents went on to pick up some other things. Right. And like I said, her mysteries are excellent. Yeah. The last one published was like 900 pages, which was ridiculous. It could have been broken up into 3 different books. But I'll tell you, I read it in 2 days. I could not put it down.
Wow.
And again, I'm saying she has strong characters, good plot lines. And I could barely hold it. It was so heavy, but couldn't put it down. I had to keep going. So, that's from the bookseller. That's from my very singular perspective. You all go into the store and talk to another bookseller and they'll say, that woman has no idea what she's talking about. But they wouldn't say it more than once.
Built a whole world, even a whole language. And a lot of parents, I think, even read it mainly because they wanted to be able to understand what their kids were saying, because they were speaking a totally different language after reading her book.
Yeah. It's an amazing imagination to create that whole world there. But again, we are readers. Those of you that are on this because you tuned in to find out more about books, and don't stop reading. And those of you that are writers, keep writing. And write what you want. The rest of the world be damned.
There you go.
Booksellers.
Yay.